Welcome to One Dude's podcast. My name is Blair Brennan. Today, I'm going to talk to you about something every single person overlooks and rarely thinks about, and that's their childhood. More specifically, though, the memories that we take from our childhoods and how that carries into our everyday lives. Think about your first memory as a child. Maybe it's the smell of a grandparent's kitchen. Maybe it's a place, whether that be a playground, your backyard, or some retreat that you went to. Maybe it's a feeling you can't put into words, but it's there, and it's in the back of your mind. Here's the thing. Historians, psychologists, and educators have all been circling for decades. Those memories aren't just personal, they're historical. They tell us something true about the world we lived in, the culture, the class, the race, the family, the structure, the opportunities and hardships that surrounded them, and how they crafted us today. This podcast makes one central argument. Childhood memories are amongst the most powerful tools we have for understanding the history of childhood itself. Not because they're perfectly accurate, but because they're real and they happened. They're empirical evidence and records that children left behind, even when no one was writing them down. We'll move through 3 segments today. First, we'll look at what childhood memory actually is and why it matters historically. Secondly, we'll examine how scholars understand the forces around it, whether it be culture, race, class, or trauma. And thirdly, I'll bring it home with a short personal narrative segment, because history lives in stories, and stories have to be told by someone. So before I can actually talk about why childhood memory matters, we really have to understand what it actually is. So according to Catherine Nelson and Robin Fivish, they had a landmark study published in the Psychological Review that talked about and argued autobiographical memory. Autobiographical memory is the memory where you actually remember yourself in a specific moment at a specific time. This obviously emerges as we progress in age and alongside our consciousness progresses. So, in other words, memory just isn't a recording device, it's a construction of the past that's built piece by piece through social interaction, narrative, and culture. It's really a radical idea when you think about it. It basically says that a child remembers that they're a product of their environment, and it's a product of the world they were raised in. It's the language that they interpreted and understood, the stories that they were told, and the experiences their community validated or suppressed. Another case was in 1983 when researcher Penelope Griffin observed Black kindergarten children emerged in what she called socio-dramatic play. This is a collaborative, imaginative, ritually symbolic role play in a school setting. And what she realized was that children were making sense of the world. They played out these different family roles, economic transactions, and social relationships. They fought over who got to be the household figure, who washed the car, who fixed the car, who watched the eggs. Griffin argued that this kind of play is very cognitively complex, and it actually consists of sequences, related ideas and events, rather than isolated pretend behaviors. What this means for memory is significant. Dramatic play is one of the primary ways children were able to process and encode their experiences. What children play is what children remember, and what they play reflects the world they lived in, the family structures, the cultural assumptions, and social hierarchies around them. Griffin noted that the effectiveness of the play varied dramatically based on their cultural familiarity. Children developed richer, more sustained narratives when play content was drawn from their own lived experiences. So here's the historical insight. If we want to understand what childhood was like, not just what adults said it was like, but what it actually felt, memory is our most direct window. It's not perfectly clear, but it's very honest, and it's empirical. That must be a source historians rely on. So now that we've established that childhood memory is constructed, the next question becomes, what is it actually constructed by? What are the forces that shape which memories survive, which die, and what they actually mean? Scholars have put this into 4 major forces: culture, race, class, and trauma. Looking at culture, it's perhaps the most foundational. Nelson and Fithish found that the way parents talk about their past, what they emphasize, and what they elaborate on, or what they skip over rather, directly shapes the quantity and quality of memories children form. Children from cultures that encourage elaborate, emotionally rich storytelling about the past develop a more detailed autobiographical memories earlier. The implication is actually striking. Memory is taught, it is culturally transmitted. The kind of childhood you remember is partly determined by the kind of childhood your culture tells you to remember. Now, looking at race, this adds a whole other layer. Research comparing black and white American students found that black women, on average, reported first memories from significantly older ages, and those memories were far more likely to center on family and community context rather than individual personal experiences. This isn't a deficiency. It's a reflection of different culture orientations towards one's memory, more collective, more relational than personal. That shapes how experiences are encoded and retrieved. The history embedded in those memories is not the same history. It cannot be told the same way. Additionally, class matters too. Scholars studying socioeconomic disadvantages have found that growing up in a home with limited educational resources, whether that be fewer books, less verbal elaboration, more environmental stress, is directly associated with differences in how memory develops. The literate environment of the home shapes the narrative capacity children develop. A child raised with stories and books and conversations about the past develops a different autobiographical memory than a child raised in a material scarce and stressed household. This isn't about intelligence. It's about the environment that is provided and what it withholds. And then there's trauma. This is where the research gets both most difficult and most historically important. Adverse childhood experiences are defined by the CDC as instances where a child is affected or surrounded by violence, abuse, or neglect. A student researcher named Maggie Van Hemst conducted a study examining the relation between adverse childhood experiences and self-esteem in college students. Her data found that the average ACE score among her patients was at 3.9, and over 40 participants had an ACE score above 4, a threshold associated in other research with significantly elevated rates of depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts. Her study found a small negative correlation between ACEs and self-esteem, not statistically significant at her sample size, but consistent with the broader trend in the literature. And what's important for our purposes isn't just the correlation, it's the mechanism. Adverse childhood experiences don't just hurt in the moment, but rather they shape how a child understands themselves, their sense of worth, their sense of safety, the stories that they tell themselves that they are. That is the identity formation under pressure, and it leaves a mark of memory. The parent's role in all of this is also very critical. Research on parental involvement has shown that how engaged caregivers are in a child's daily life, their educational experiences, their emotional development, and all the things in between, shapes not just how outcomes, but the texture of the child's self-understanding. When parents are present, they're validating and they're involved, and children are able to develop richer and more coherent narratives about their own lives. When they're absent, overwhelmed, or harmful, those narratives fragment and become far more negative. What this means historically is profound. It's really profound in the sense that childhood memories that survive into adulthood, that shape our identity, that inform how we move through the world, they're not random. They're constructed by the four forces of race, class, trauma, and culture. And that study really shows that childhood memory is a social history of itself. I want to close with something a little bit different, because history is really most powerful when it's not abstract, when it's from the source. One of my primary sources was a simple worksheet. It was called The Childhood Memories of Place. And in this worksheet, it asked a few questions. It said, what were your favorite spaces? Were any spaces frightening? And did you avoid spaces? Or did your perception of the same space change as you got older? When I think of a personal anecdote, I think of my driveway. And in my driveway, I had this basketball hoop. And every single day, all I wanted to do, or all I could think about, was getting home and playing basketball with my brother. And to me, I look back and I think about how much that has shaped me today. It really gave me a sense of determination, of work ethic, of bonding, of getting outside, of being healthy and happy. And so many of those core pillars I carry into my life today. So whatever your memory is, it's historical evidence, not just of my life, but of the conditions that make our lives the way that we perceive them. The neighborhood I grew up in, the family structure around me, the experiences that felt safe or threatening, all of that is in there. If you know it and you know how to read it, then you can interpret it yourself. Thank you for listening to this podcast. The sources that inform this episode span psychology, history, education, and social science, all united by a single question that is worth asking: what was it actually like to be a child? Not what adults decided it was, not what institutions prescribed, but what it felt like from the inside to grow up in a particular time and place with a particular set of experiences shaping a particular self. That is the history of childhood, and it starts with our memory and interpretations of our childhood.